What is a linotype? Well, we just called it a typesetting machine to start with, because that's what it does. It's called a linotype because it makes one line of type at a time.
Try to harken it back to those Rube Goldberg contraptions.
It is a 2-ton contrivance that stands 7 foot tall.
The absolute pinnacle of late Victorian engineering.
Where like the canary pops the balloon.
And they're insane.
You couldn't explain to them what it is. They say, that's just a big typewriter.
And the bowling ball rolls down and scares the cat.
Cross between a typewriter and a backhoe and a pop machine.
Canary pops the balloon cracks the egg, and then I have my breakfast.
It's terribly complicated. It was invented by a German watchmaker. It has cams and levers.
There's just a lot going on.
There's belts and pulleys and everything's flying around in circles.
It's things that would totally baffle most modern day mechanics. And yet, strangely enough, it works. It requires you know the machine and you understand its limitations and you understand that it can kill you.
It burned me pretty good, yeah?
It is very intimidating.
I do sort of live in fear of it because it can be kind of rattle-trap at times.
It gets to be your friend or your enemy, depending upon how it's working.
It's a fascinating machine, A, and B, it's a complete career dead end.
I tell people that once you get ink and type metal in your blood, it never comes out.
It's like a love affair.
It's one of the most complicated machines I've ever seen, and it's one of the most fun things I've ever been around.
The great inventor, Thomas Edison, saw that machine and he says, hey, this is the 8th wonder of the world.
A linotype is a great means of speeding up the production of typesetting instead of the old cumbersome method of setting type by hand where you're using one hand to pick out a piece of type at a time and put it into a composing stick. You're instead able to sit at a keyboard, type as fast as you can and as fast as the machine will let you go, and compose type that can then be printed from. You hear about people picking things up by osmosis. I kind of think that's true because this is a case where I watched and observed, and a lot of what I learned about the linotype I learned from my dad.
Oh yes, I taught him. I taught him some of the basics of the printing operation, and you can see he's expanded since then.
I tend to set maybe a few more mistakes than my dad would, but he has always been willing to proofread for me and correct those mistakes.
I can spot a mistake a mile away. I can spot a misspelled word a mile away.
It takes a special breed of person to run it. Yeah, I think that I'm that person, just crazy enough to think it's fun and just smart enough to keep it operating.
Once the operator is done casting his slugs, casting the page, he will take the slugs over to the proofing area.
Here we've got some of the type that we set over on the Linotype today. I'm going to put it in the bed of the proof press.
And the slugs will be locked into the bed of the press here and inked and printed to determine if there are any flaws.
Lock it into place with some miscellaneous furniture. Hopefully it's a clean proof, so I don't have to go back and reset anything.
Any mistakes, any errors would go back to the composer. He'd recast that slug. come back to the proofer, and so on until it was signed off on and ready to go on the press. And when it went to press, it went on to press something like over here. Later on, they learned that if you have multiple editions or multiple presses in major urban centers like New York City or Boston or Chicago, it's kind of a pain to proof multiple lockups of type when you're running 4 presses, 6 presses, 8 presses at a time. So they would make a cast of an entire form and put the identical cast on all of their presses, so that way they could meet the circulation demand. And that's how they printed newspapers in volume in the day.
Ever since I've been very young, there's been some tendency from my family to, at least my mother, on my mother's side, she wanted to show off her kids. My brother and myself, and we liked to sing and dance around the house, and so we wound up being singers and dancers. When I was 9 years old, I was running a little printing press in my own house. For, I think my circulation of my newspaper was 20 people, all tenants in the building. I spent 35 years working for the New York Times, and that was my life. And I guess I was just built for that kind of work, as the other people were as well. They didn't think much about it, maybe it was just a night's work to them, but I may be more sensitive, and I could see this was the story every night, the story of our lives, the story of the world's life. The world is being made new for tomorrow. What happened today, you'll find out tomorrow, but we're doing it to get you to that stage.
By means of printing, the fund of knowledge accumulated through the ages is available to everyone, rich and poor alike. Printing is essential to all education. All the other arts rely on it. Religious movements depend on it. Business could not function without it, nor could government.
The only thing available in people in the 1400s, anywhere, was handwritten manuscripts.
Books are falling apart as fast as people were reading them, so the scribe was just recreating the book because they were disintegrating.
Monks in an abbey writing a Bible for months and months and months for one Bible.
And once you wrote a handwritten Bible, which took you 1 or 2 years to produce 1 or 2 Bibles, that's all. You know, you had produced a work of art, but you hadn't produced anything for mass culture or for mass education.
A lot of people think that Johannes Gutenberg invented printing, and technically that's not true. People printed for centuries before Gutenberg came along, but they're just never very good at it. What Gutenberg did was invent the way to do it, which was the most efficient way. That involved making a press, one not unlike this press here.
So all of a sudden came the printing press, and shortly thereafter there were hundreds of printing presses, thousands of printing presses in Europe, and thousands upon thousands of people were reading, were getting information. So there's this huge explosion. And people thought probably, my God, how can we possibly absorb more? The next big one was the Linotype.
Linotype is the embodiment of a different age. The age when letterpress flowered, when it was in its grandeur. And the problem is very few people know about it. And I still believe that one of my roles in life is to help the memory of the industry. You had to have the Linotype machine because you had an army of people setting type by hand.
Typesetting used to be done this way by everybody. One line of type at a time, one letter at a time. It was slow, it was cumbersome.
You have a case in front of you, you take one letter at a time. So the first thing is you've got to find the letter and select it. Then you have to assemble it into a line. Then you have to return all that type back into the case.
And that was tedious, slow, hard work.
If you have a drawer of type and you're making a book and you run out of lowercase e, you got to make more type, or you got to break down pages you've already made. So that's what they call being out of sorts. A piece of type is called a sort. Out of sorts, you're screwed.
There were was money to be made in mechanized typesetting because newspapers had a phenomenal investment in the number of people required to set type by hand. So there had to be some method for mechanization, and that's what they were looking for.
And so they began to look at the various processes and try and think of ways of speeding them up.
They tried all kind of schemes. They tried having a funnel and dropping the letters in, trying to line all kinds of ideas, anything they could think of.
And so from the 1860s to the 1880s, there must have been 50 or 60 different attempts to mechanize typesetting.
I'm standing in front of the page compositor, a machine that had a very big role in Mark Twain's life.
The most famous investor was the American novelist Mark Twain, who invested most of his fortune in the page compositor, which did not work and forced him to go bankrupt.
But generally speaking, all through the 19th century, hand composition was the norm. And it wasn't until the final years, about the 1880s, 1890s, that serious attempts were made.
But none of the people who started down the road to invent a mechanized typesetting machine succeeded. The one success came by accident. It all starts because a stenographer wants to transcribe his notes faster. James Ogilvy Clephane was a stenographer. He had worked in Lincoln's cabinet, was the fastest and most accurate stenographer of his day. He's so famous because of the fact that he can get his notes done fast and get them to all the lawyers and to the judge. And the way he did that was to use something called a lithostone, a polished stone using lithography, where the image is backwards, and then you could reproduce as many copies as you wanted. And he saw one brilliant way of using the typewriter. Why don't I take the paper, after I type on it, the ink is still wet, I'll turn it over and I'll rub the ink onto the lithostone. So now it's backwards. What a phenomenal idea. The problem is the ink dries at different levels on the paper. So he has the idea, but the typewriter is not going to do it for him. So he finds an engineer named Charles T. Moore. Moore comes up with an idea for a device with a cylinder, a typewriter keyboard, with a ribbon, and instead of doing a page, it does a line. You cut it apart, and then you rub the ink down onto the lithostone. This machine is not quite doing what Clephane wants, so they go to a machine shop called Holland Company, and there they meet a German immigrant, a new American, named Ottmar Mergenthaler. Mergenthaler helps them develop some of the ideas for this machine, but says it's really not going to work. It's not going to do what you want it to do. He helps them develop another version of it, but it doesn't do it either. He says, no, the only way is you're going to have to find a way of using actual type. Well, Clephane has another brainstorm. He says, when you use the typewriter, it impacts the paper. There's pressure there. Why can't we use this new material called paper mache? They raise money, and they develop a machine which we call the first band machine. And all the letters are on a metal band, and they're all sticking out. They're all in relief. You hit the keys, and they line up all the characters in the line. You force the paper mache into it, and then you get an impression. You then put it down, put molten metal into it, and you get a line of type. Okay, great idea. Doesn't really work. They raise more money, and they develop the second band machine. And this time, all the letters are recessed into the bands. So you line up all the bands, you have one line, you force molten metal in, no more paper mache, you get a line of type out. Okay, it works, but every letter is the same width. So the capital M is as wide as a lowercase I. So typographically, it's not very good. So Mergenthaler realizes at that point that every letter has to be an individual unit so it can be whatever width is appropriate for the design of the character. But he has to take the band and cut it into pieces so that every letter is an individual unit. He can move those units around the machine and then assemble them into a line. So they now raise more money. At that point, Mergenthaler creates the blower machine, which uses the individual matrix that moves the matrix around the machine and actually can work. The Linotype machine changed the world, and it all started because a stenographer wanted to transcribe his notes.
It was, in fact, a modern feat of engineering. Hard metal molds for letters of the alphabet, called matrices, could now be brought into contact with molten type metal. The result? A metal bar of type, a linotype.
The inventor's name was Ottmar Mergenthaler,
Otto Morgenthaler.
Otmar Morgenthaler.
Otmar Ludwig Morgenthaler.
The TH is not pronounced, it's just Morgenthaler.
He was a watchmaker, I think, by profession, watching clockmaker, so he was used to dealing with precision engineering work.
If he built pieces and parts for a wristwatch, they had to be exactly right. You couldn't have them a little too big, a little too small. You're not going to keep time that way.
He takes night courses in electricity and mechanics and starts to realize that he's going to be drafted into the Prussian army.
He did not want that to happen. His parents didn't want that to happen. And they finally made some arrangement where he was sent out of the country.
He comes to the United States in 1872. In fact, he comes off the ship called the SS Berlin, where he came over in steerage with a wooden suitcase. And it was at a place called Locust Point in Baltimore, where some years later, he would have his own factory.
He made something that was right, and you could repeat it exactly the same. And there's a lot of watchmaking qualities in that Linotype machine.
He was the creative genius behind this. Somebody else gave him the germ of the idea, but it was his genius that made the Linotype and made it successful.
Son of humble parents, apprentice clockmaker, immigrant, skilled craftsman, inventor in 1886 of a machine that revolutionized an industry, a machine that pulled the mind of humanity forward 1,000 years in the space of a generation.
The Linotype gave you the mechanization so that one person could do the work of 6.
It could set type 6 times faster than a man could, and you didn't have to throw the type back into a type case when you were finished.
The hand compositors, the typesetters, when they heard, oh, there's a machine going to come and replace you, they started to worry, I'm sure, because they thought, oh, we're going to be out of a job. But no such thing.
Because the Linotype was such an effective device and it replaced all these people, within a decade after the Linotype, they were up to the same number of people they had with handset type. Because the Linotype generated so much need for typesetting for books and magazines and newspapers.
The way that this machine transformed information is probably its most significant achievement.
If you look at literacy in the United States before the Linotype and after the Linotype, there's a gigantic jump because now you can set type faster. And because you can set type faster, you can print faster. So you look then at the number of books published in the United States after the Linotype. Look at the number of magazines. Look at the number of new newspapers that started.
It was important because it made printing that much more affordable to the masses, not just in America, but around the world.
Without the Linotype machine and the speed that it came up with, you would not have the communication system that you have now.
It's really something to think that just a machine that makes letters from a German immigrant from Baltimore could have such a deep effect on people and society.
I'm Davin Kunze. I'm 34 years old. I'm a Linotype operator. I have people come in to see the shop. We have students come in from schools all the time, and they're in awe. They have no idea what this thing is or how it works, and I show them how the type is distributed back into the magazines, and it's magic. I like the fact that it's old. I like the fact that the way it works. It's not like a computer that I look at and I don't understand how the circuit boards are, making stuff do what it does. I'm incredibly happy I know how it works. It's very impressive to the women.
The operations necessary to produce a slug or line of type are divided into 3 groups: composition of the matrix line, casting of the slug, distribution of the matrices. The operator, depressing the keys, releases matrices from the magazine channel. The matrices are delivered to the assembling elevator in the correct sequence. Here's a close-up of some mats. You can see the letter that has been punched or engraved into which the molten type metal is going to be injected. The line of matrices is sent to the casting unit. Against the opening of this mold, the mat will fit perfectly. The plunger injects the molten type metal into the mold. The slug is ejected into the galley. At the same time, the matrices are transferred to the second elevator and raised to the distributor. Here, they are returned to their respective channels in the magazine.
I mean, it's incredible, and it's incredible the thought power that went into figuring out how this machine works. I can't even wrap my head around it reading the manuals, let alone try to figure it out.
We would call this a type matrix, and this is, of course, a size to explain to people because it has to be seen.
The mats, see, the little things like this, and they come in all different sizes.
The heart and soul of the Linotype machine is the matrix.
This small piece of brass performs a vitally important job. It's a matrix, a mold for a letter. It forms, together with other matrices, a word in type. And then a line of words in type, a linotype.
This is what sets the type. This is why it's a typesetting machine. Everything else is to make this work.
This is a mat that actually went through 60 different processes to be manufactured.
The tooth combination in every matrix matched up to the channel in the magazine. So as the matrices went to the top, they went along a distributor bar and then fell back into the proper channel.
I'll sometimes be setting line after line of type, and then I just stop and kind of stare at the return and watch them drop down. And then realize I'm supposed to be doing work.
A steel wedge known as a spaceband is assembled between one word and the next.
At one point, when the line goes over to be cast, it forces the wedge up, and as it goes up, it expands the space between the words, justifying everything to the left and right-hand margin.
Strange keyboard, if you don't know anything about the keyboard, has 90 keys on it. It starts out with the most used letter, which is a lowercase e, and it goes E, T, A, O, I, N, S, H, R, D, L, U, C, M, F, W, Y, P, V, B, G, K, Q, J, X, Z.
So Otmar put all the lowercase letters on one side based on frequency of letter use, all the caps on the other side, and everything else in the middle. So you look at the keyboard, it's E, T, A, O, I, N, S, H, R, D, L, U. Etern-Sherdlu. Now the reason that became famous was there's no backspace key or delete key on a Linotype. If you made a mistake, when you started typing and you made a mistake, you started in the wrong line or whatever, you couldn't abort easily. So what you would do is run your finger down the first two rows of keys, and then when the slug came out and it said Etern-Sherdlu, you'd throw it back in the pot, no one would know what was going on. But what would happen, as fate would have it, is that would wind up in print. And so all through the 20s and 30s and 40s, that was a big joke in the printing industry. Who is Etern-Sherdlu?
The Linotype machine was important on several aspects. On the most important of all of them is its contribution to journalism. Because whether things are looking nice or not, the ability to have a newspaper coming out every day is non-negotiable.
This is a shrine to the First Amendment, and part of that is the history of news. That's where we are right now. We're in the news gallery at the museum. Right behind me, you'll see things from front pages from 1940 to 1945. We're seeing all of World War II right here. And every one of these papers was set with a Linotype machine by a guy, probably in a very hot room, really squinting to get every single word right.
So Linotype was able to take the words of a few people and make them available for a larger audience because it made newspaper production possible.
It's this machine that made it possible for newspapers to print 2, sometimes even 3 editions a day.
The newspapers went from 8 pages to 48 pages, like almost overnight.
The cost of newspapers was driven down. It used to be a dime and a nickel a piece. Pretty soon you saw the New York papers selling for a penny a piece.
You can take longer stories, you can take more stories, you can print more often, you can print faster.
They had to have content that would attract readers. Therefore, the stories became more salacious, the headlines became larger. If it involved a murder or sex or gambling, it was sure to draw readers in.
Even today, with the gossip channel, TMZ.com, Twitter, they got to know now the latest joke, the latest have you seen it, the latest web video, viral or what have you. I mean, it's the instantaneousness of the fact that drives the business.
The need to read, which stirs the very souls of men, is more evident in the present era of progress than ever before. Publishers, bookstores, and newsstands pour out thousands of books, magazines, and newspapers every day to inform, instruct, and amuse. The greater part of these printed materials are made possible by various types of mechanical typesetting. Machines which set type up in lines, cast from molten metals, first introduced at the close of the last century, are now the most widely used.
Linotype was one of the most profitable companies you can possibly imagine. Newspapers had to buy machines, they had to buy new fonts, they had to buy mats that wore out, they had to buy parts for the machine, they had to buy service for the machine where it was necessary. The Linotype company was a cash cow. Beginning in 1886, the Linotype spread rapidly through the United States and Canada, but almost simultaneously in Western Europe and the English-speaking world because of the British Empire. And by 1928, the Linotype reigned supreme as the primary typesetting device throughout the world. But Mergenthal's biggest problem is he can't stop inventing. He keeps improving the machine. He keeps coming up with new ideas, and the problem is the investors want to be able to ship machines and make money from them. He ruled with an iron hand. Just the way he ruled his workers at the newspaper, he ruled everybody at the company. Whitlaw Reid wanted to make money very fast. Otmar didn't want to build the machines that fast.
There's a picture of Whitlaw Reid standing next to Mergenthaler. He was listening to what Mergenthaler said, but Mergenthaler was not an equal to him.
So they start to become at loggerheads. It gets to a point where Reid starts really hitting the machine as being bad. The machine's not doing what it's supposed to do.
What he was doing that for was basically, he thought the stock price would go lower, he would buy more of it. He wanted to control the whole thing himself, and all the records that are still out there are very ashamed. You should be ashamed of what he was doing.
Otmar was a perfectionist. And again, he couldn't stop inventing. This is another thing that drove Reid crazy. Reid had his own set of problems. He was a taskmaster. He was demanding. He wanted everything immediately. He put a lot of pressure on Mergenthaler, but Mergenthaler put a lot of pressure on himself.
But he also had the problem of working very, very late at night. He had a family to take care of and afford. And with all of those things, his health began to go.
Otmar Mergenthaler unfortunately died of tuberculosis when he was about 44. He didn't live to see the great success that the Linotype eventually became.
If he deserves anything, he deserves the respect of being the person that we should be thank you for what you've done. You put the world 300 years ahead by inventing the Linotype machine.
It's almost the story of the American dream. He comes to America with nothing. He goes on to invent the machine that will change the world. And yet, almost no one knows who he was.
That's the first question people ask me when they find out I'm the public printer. They want to know if I print money, and I say no. And then they say, well, can you get me my passport? And I say no, and then they just move on.
We print the Congressional Record, the Federal Register. We print the Code of Federal Regulations.
We've printed every significant historical document in the life of the nation since 1861. So our first big historic job was probably the printing of the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. The stumbling block in terms of efficiency and speed was that we set everything by hand. And when we really turned the equation around from minutes per line to lines per minute, our work here just exploded.
Well, the Linotype battery GPO, as far as I know, was probably the largest in the world. I think there was about 150 in total throughout the building. And it was just something to see, all of those machines lined up all the way full length of the building. And the noise was pretty loud, all those machines running at one time, pinging away, and men shouting and moving around. And it was almost like a ballet of machinery and men moving around, trying to get this thing done, because every night the record, had to get out.
It's just fascinating how every piece is an integral part of one action leads to another action, and I've just found that to be interesting as hell. I was a Linotype machinist. I repaired them. Worked with a head machinist who was a little reluctant on teaching me at first because he noticed I had 2 fingers gone, so he didn't ever figure I'd be able to do it. He used to go out for lunch every day, and while he was gone for lunch, of course I had to cover the 11 machines, I'd make sure I took one of them apart. And when he came back, he'd see that I had taken it apart, and he'd hit the roof, but that was okay. He had to put it back together again. In the meantime, I was looking over his shoulder, getting, garnishing all of his knowledge. What's really nice is when you come across some of the old timers that used to run these machines and stuff. They just, they love it when they see a running machine. They'll be out in the vestibule there or in the hallway, and you hear the click, 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 and all of a sudden they're attracted like mice to cheese, okay, coming in the door because they hear that sound.
You've got the clink of the matrices as they fall down into the assembling tray. You've got the sounds of the mold disc being pushed up against it. You've got all 13 cams spinning at the same time. You're adding all of these different sounds to the whirring sound that's been going, reassuring you that the machine is on and that it's working right.
The whir, and you hear just a little tap noise. Click, click, there's a clink, which is the space band. Click. The elevator moves down, you hear it go clink, clink, and then you hear the sound of a shh, and then that last line comes out and goes clunk and drops in place.
And then that's followed by the cascade of mats as they fall back down into the distributor, down into the magazine. And you hear that brass against brass sound as the mats hit each other.
You'd hear clink, 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 wherever that mat was going to drop.
It's just a cacophony of sound, but it's in its own a Linotype symphony.
And that's the sound that they grew up with, something that they did for years.
If your mouth keeps your hands from working, keep it shut. So that's a pretty good motto.
These people that ran them were really irreplaceable. I mean, you just couldn't put anybody down at a machine and say, you do this. It took several years to really become a decent printer at a Linotype machine, and really many, many more years to become really a good operator.
Linotype compositors were the preeminent laborers of their day.
This wasn't just a job. This whole thing in this newspaper age, it was a calling. It was something bigger.
They were the artists. They were the people that created this wonderful, beautiful typography that we try and emulate today digitally.
The people who operated them were talented, artistic people posing as industrial types in dirty coveralls,
They saved you from making stupid errors, especially those guys the compositors really saved you from making stupid errors from upstairs. And sometimes the guys in composing would find an error in the story while they were putting it in and say, did you mean to say he was guilty? Because everything in this seems to say he's not guilty. What did the jury say? Was he guilty? Oh, I forgot to put not in, and it went through everybody, and they never caught it. But you know who caught it? The guy down there with the cigar that's putting it in.
The goal was pick up your paper at the door of your house 7 o'clock in the morning. That's the goal. And you wouldn't care how you worked it or how you did it at night or when you went to press. That's your problem. Our problem is we want a paper there in the morning, first thing.
You had a deadline on Thursday, and you didn't dare miss that deadline, because if you missed that deadline, they couldn't print the paper. Then if the paper didn't get printed, it couldn't get in the mail. It'd get in the mail, the prescribers wouldn't get their paper till late, and they wouldn't like that. So it was a vicious cycle. It was not easy, but it was fun.
I was sitting there at my machine doing some classified advertising, I guess, and along came some people. I could see them from a distance. The foreman of the composing room then came over to me, and he said, "Carl," he says, "we have some visitors." He brought all the people over, and then there was this woman, and he says, "Oh yes," he says, "and this is Marilyn Monroe." He could have been knocking me out of my chair if he wanted to, but I took the shock. I said, "Okay, Marilyn Monroe and anybody else, you still all have to learn something about the machine at once." And I set up a linotype in her name. I said it in boldface, so I know she would like that. And I gave it to her, and I said, "This is your name on the piece." And she looked at it, and everybody else was looking at it and looking at me, I guess. And she said, "Thank you very much." And she kissed me on top of my head, because I'm sitting down here, and she's standing over me. And I said to myself, there goes the day. That's all they're going to talk about now today is my head.
In Memoriam, City of Boston Printing Department, 1897 to 2010.
All right, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the City of Boston Graphics Art Printing Equipment Auction. Today we're going to be auctioning off the assets of the printing department. All right, here we go. Lot 101, the Heidelberg 4-color Perfector. And how much? Let's start off at about $20,000. $20,000 to get it going. $20,000 on bidder, now $22,500. Any interest in the Linotype machine? $500 in the Linotype? $500 quickly? Couple $100? Any interest at all? Any interest in the Linotype? $100. $164, $100. $10. 10, not 20. 10, not 20, not $20. 10 are now 20. 10, not 20, not 20. This accent is killing me.
I'm here attempting to and successfully acquiring a Linotype machine for the museum in Waltham.
$10 now 20? Any 10, 20? You want them both? You can take both of them, right?
Take both.
Take them both.
I think I spent $10 for a machine. Whether I bought one machine or two machines is a matter of conjecture.
This gentleman is from one of the museums. I want you to go visit the equipment.
They were sold for $10 to the Museum of Industry and Innovation out in Waltham, Mass. And so they are going to be setting up some sort of demonstration to show people how Linotypes work.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Very much.
Good luck. You'll enjoy these.
I'm going to need it.
All right. Now, 166.
I know what the machine does, and I know why it does it. As far as the operation and maintenance, I'm very much in the dark on that, but I guess I'm going to have to learn. Can you get that? Of course, it's got my name and address on it. Maybe you shouldn't be photographing that. Do you know anybody who wants a second machine?
Offhand, I don't, but Dave Seed, because he travels the country.
Why don't you get the word to him? Because I definitely do not want a second machine. They're going to skin me for the first one.
You really, really should make touch base with Dave.
Well, let me give you my name, and I'll give you my phone number and my email address, and he can get to me any way he cares to.
I'll be very blunt.
Yeah.
You're going to have to get to him.
I'd say since '95, I've probably worn out 4 vehicles and over 1 million miles, I would say. Beth and I will get in our vehicle and we'll start in Tennessee and we'll make a whole circuit of the West Coast or the East Coast and might work on anywhere from 20 to 100 jobs. We want to teach everybody in their own print shop how to take care of their own equipment, because there is nobody else that's going to travel like we do. It's good that we both get along with each other fairly well. Otherwise, I'd be hanging outside the window sometimes. Basically, we're going up to see a customer at White Star named Tim Trower, and he wants a mouthpiece put on his Linotype.
I went ahead and dug out screws. Your choice of mouthpieces.
Okay.
Probably.
How big a type do you set? These are not mouthpiece screws.
Oh.
Nope, this is F65, that's mole screws. I don't see any mouthpiece screws in there.
Okay. Let's go to the second location.
Looking for F2791 is the part number. Okay, 308 is the gas equivalent. When I look at a part, sometimes I know the number, sometimes I don't. There's a spring down there on the lift that's a BB479. The rubber rollers are part number H2601 for the smooth one. The keys are H74, sometimes they go bad. Plungers an F898. What we're going to replace is this piece right here. It's called the mouthpiece. That's the old used one. This is the brand new one we're going to be putting on. To run the machine, the puppy dog tail needs to be up. Now we're going to partially cycle the machine. We'll stop it right there. The mold slide will come all the way out of the machine. One of the things, if this throat is dirty, you'll get bad slugs. They won't look good, they won't fill up.
I've seen him work on a machine on a project that would have me literally cursing and tearing my hair out, and he breaks a sweat, and that's about it.
This is a throat saw for a Linotype. You want to saw on the way out so you're pulling the dirt out with you. You don't want to push the dirt back in. Yep. Good flow. What I just did was I pushed the plunger down again so that the metal would squirt out all the holes, and you could see if you had a good flow to every hole and a good stream, and it looks like we had plenty of stream, plenty of pressure on all holes, so looks like we're good right here. Squirt number 2.
Well, what I like about Dave is that he shows you all of his secrets. He is a great teacher. He wants you to learn what he's doing so that the next time you have a problem and he's in England on a service trip or in New England, you can take care of it yourself.
It's a big industrial machine. And the uses today are not in that industrial setting anymore. They're in studio settings. They're in small shop settings.
My name's John Christensen, and I'm the first among equals at Firefly Press in Boston, Massachusetts. We are a commercial letterpress printing shop. Letterpress has, of course, long since disappeared as mainstream commercial commerce, but it has come back in recent years as a craft.
At one point, it's just how things were done. People weren't too precious about it. But I think given the way that technology has evolved, I think there is a certain amount of integrity in the process that I respond to.
Letterpress is increasingly being seen as something quite special, not because it's changed, but because the rest of the world has changed. And now the bite and the use of the nice papers and the brilliance of the colors and the physical presence of the printing is something that people now know to appreciate and to desire.
I love the fact that sitting down at a keyboard, I have only so many typefaces. And so, it's my responsibility to use them with intelligence.
And here then is an element that enters into letterpress that simply does not play so large a part in any of the more modern printing technologies, and that is craft. The simple knowing of a technique.
Craft means you care and you know about what you're doing. I think anybody that's going to study typography needs to get rooted first in the letterpress method whether they set type by hand or use a Linotype or a Ludlow. They need to know how to use type before they use it.
I had a romantic notion of letterpress when I was a young fellow and began collecting the stuff because I never had much of a budget to work with, and the stuff was all free. I studied journalism in college, and I always wanted to publish my own journal or magazine. The Almanac tackles a lot of land issues, environmental things, sort of the cultural health of the state. I don't think there's another publication in America on this scale that's done hot metal. Eldon is one of those angels who happened to be around when I was starting out, and his career, because of the technology, his career as a Linotype operator was winding down because there just weren't any left. And he started working for me, and he's always worked part-time, just he comes out when I need him. There would have been no Wapsipinicon Almanac, at least in its current incarnation, without Eldon.
One of the reasons that newspapers like to employ deaf people is because they weren't bothered by the noisy working conditions. And yet, strangely enough, even though they couldn't hear the machine, they could sense what was going wrong with the machine and were able to respond to it just about as quickly as a hearing person.
He says I'm not a show-off.
It's very easy to go into a lot of print shops and see hand printers working. Very few of them have the experience of seeing a full working Linotype machine that we have here with our Linotype operator, Mr. Ray Loomis, who comes here every Saturday as a volunteer.
My name's Raymond Loomis. Born in Baltimore, Maryland, 82 years ago. So I've been around a while. Our machine is 75 years old, and it still runs, and it runs well. It was well maintained over its lifetime, and we try to keep it running too. When I was working by myself, which is a bad thing on a machine like that, be by yourself, and I was checking to see if the blower, coolant blower was on, and I put my hand down, and the machine came back on my hands and held it. I turned it off quick enough since I felt it, but I was stuck. I couldn't move. I couldn't reach anything. I didn't know what to do. And then I thought the only thing I can really do is to pull that advance lever and let it go do its thing. And I did, and I pulled it and squinted, and it backed right off. It didn't come any further than my fingers were already caught. And they were black and blue for a while. There was 2 or 3 of those fingers there.
Operating a Linotype can be a little frightening.
You don't hurry on the Linotype. You clear your head before you start, and you can't be thinking about a lot of other things. There's a lot going on, a lot you have to watch for.
This is all pre-idiot proof, all pre-OSHA equipment. The assumption was you knew what you were doing.
There's so many moving parts, and there's metal that's 550 some odd degrees that could explode on me at any minute.
There's something we call a squirt.
Lead will squirt out, and you're used to, when you hear a certain sound, you shove back.
That meant that there was something wrong in the setting line where there was a gap of space. That space was going to be filled with hot metal, and it was going to come at you.
And when lead comes out of that thing, it's got to be right on the button.
You get so attuned to the machine that you can hear it getting ready to squirt. And if you're good, you can get out of the way. Otherwise, you get a pant leg full of metal.
But then a lot of times I'd jump out of the chair before I would, while I was casting, just in case I didn't do it right.
I saved my first squirt. I have it somewhere. I'm not sure where it is.
I asked the guy one time, is there anybody teaching this? And he says, no, not anymore. They used to do it all the way around the world. But I said, well, I'd like to start Linotype University 1. And pretty good idea.
If you read the word that says Linotype University, you're thinking of a campus with big buildings or something. Well, yeah, that's not the printing business.
This is Linotype University 8 class. This is where people come to the United States, to Denmark, Iowa, to learn how to operate a linotype.
I probably learned more about the machine this week than I ever had in the 15 years or so that I operated a machine.
People all over the country, the world, that's interested in it. Like this week, we've got one fellow from Australia and then one from England.
We have a very good range of professional or ex-professional linotype engineers who are very, very generous with our advice and help.
Linotype University is a unique corner of America, run by a guy named Larry Raid.
This gentleman that runs this museum here and welcomed me here is Mr. Larry J. Raid, and I've got to say, we say in Australia, mate, good on you, mate.
And he, from what I could gather, is just a fanatic for the machine and taught himself how to use it.
His two passions are vastly different, linotype machines and locomotives.
The train, it's a Davenport locomotive, an 060 diesel mechanical with a Cat V8 engine in. I rebuilt 6 miles of railroad track with that Ford 8 in, had a little boom on the back.
I mean, he bought a train and laid track for it, and I mean, who does that kind of thing?
Larry's a collector.
It's very hard for him to part with anything, as you can see.
Most of the places that have them are museums, and if they have one linotype, they don't need 2 of them. If they have one printing press, they don't need a 3rd or 4th or 5th one. And I'm not that way. These are a couple linotype, intertype that I'm using for parts. And as we go down, there's another linotype over this way. I've just been a collector, and I just keep collecting and keep collecting, and now I've got something over 90 of them altogether.
What some people don't understand about Larry is his dad owned a junkyard, and so Larry grew up in a junkyard. So having machines sitting outside or rusting or whatever doesn't surprise Larry. Larry, oh yeah, we'll get that running, oh, we'll fix that.
And so it's just sitting there waiting to be restored again.
Because to Larry, nothing is ruined. It's all still good. It's metal, it'll fix.
I've also encountered people that sort of belittle the whole program, and I can see why. He's not classically trained. He wasn't trained by Linotype to do this. But in his own way, he's a total genius.
There's so many people that have called and said, well, Larry Raid says call you, or Larry Raid says this, or Larry says that. And it's because Larry's excited, other people get excited too.
He's the kind of prophet that I think this sort of thing needs, this gospel, if you will, needs, is somebody who's passionate and maybe a little bit crazy. You need that, I think.
People change. Products change. Everything changes. And every change adds to the problem of communications. The rate of change is accelerating. Faster. 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 Stop. But you can't stop. You can't hold back the surge of change or the growth of information. It will continue in spite of you, and you're going to have to cope with it. Otherwise...
The death knell for the Linotype and all typesetting machines that use metal started in 1945 when the Intertype company showed a machine called the photosetter.
A photosetter, Matt, doesn't cast hot metal at all, but it shoots a beam of light through a small photonegative in the mat onto a specially prepared piece of paper, which is then photographed and prepared for offset production.
So it looked like a Linotype, acted like a Linotype, did everything a Linotype did. But photographically.
Is it here? Okay, here we have, and I don't know if you can get in on that. It's from the New York Times. It's the last standing Times, or standing type as Times went from hot metal to cold metal type. But I believe this is a page of the obituaries, which is kind of sad, isn't it?
In one way, you felt sadness. You had to, because you knew it was coming eventually, like a dying patient.
And they came to work one day, and it was all over.
I've been a printer now for 26 years. I've been in this place for 20 years. 6 years apprenticeship, 20 years journeyman. And these are words that aren't just tossed around. All the knowledge I've acquired over these 26 years is all locked up in a little box now called a computer.
I had some guys around me, and we poured a couple of glasses out, and we said, to yesterday. So we said goodbye to the past and hello to the future.
We had these machines on the back of a big truck, a dump truck, and I stopped at a junkyard, a salvage yard, and I just turned my head and pulled this lever, and it slid, those machines slid off. And I just couldn't even look at it because I knew there was good machines, but nobody was running them anymore, as far as I knew.
And the records I made, they just smashed it up with a big 12-pound hammer, and I thought, oh, that's the sad part of it all.
At the end of Linotype's usefulness here, there was no market for the machines. And the only way they could really be gotten rid of was to scrap them. As far as I know, they were all surplused and they were let go, and unfortunately they were probably junked. They opened up a window at the back of the floor where the largest of the Linotype batteries was, and just pushed them out into the parking lot. Pushed them out to be piled up and hauled off for scrap.
They're scrapped in two ways. The machines are hauled to the junkyard and melted, and the skill sets and the expertise and the knowledge of the people that ran them is also hauled to the junkyard.
All the presses, the Linotype, the proof presses, all of that disappeared. All that iron scrap went out in the back and rusted there. for this.
It's a cathode ray tube phototype setting system called Linotron 505. It produces high-quality typography.
Machines like the Photon, the very first phototypesetting machine. Looks like a combination of a steel-cased desk, a typewriter, and something from Star Trek. This was the future back in 1985, and as you can see, the future is past. Well, this is the end of the tour, and this is kind of the unresolved thread of our tour. This is the computer room, the digital typesetting room, and it's very old. This is from like 1990.
Farewell, farewell, that one should lose. The best years of my life I've spent with you. Now our printing days are at an end. You've set your final type, my friend. Computers are the thing that finished you.
This is what the Linotype company looked like in Brooklyn.
At one time, two square blocks were the factory. One square block was where they made the machines. The other square block was the headquarters and the matrix manufacturing. It's now a storage facility for some moving company. It's very sad.
You've got to go. No more hot lead. The type we love to set, that way is dead. Computers and cathode tubes replaced us, but by God, they'll not erase us, 'cause we taught them everything they know.
When Mergenthaler moved out of the old Grierson Street building, I walked through the building with the old building supervisor, and I found a few things, including this rather nice sign. I don't know where it had been on the walls at Mergenthaler, asking employees to keep the place clean, but I thought it was kind of nice, and I saved that, and for some reason have kept it ever since. I'm Matthew Carter, type designer, former Linotype employee. There was a huge amount of work involved, I mean, particularly for the letter drawing office, in adapting the metal types for film. My job was to explore certain advantages that there might be in this new technology, a sort of liberation from the constraints of metal typecasting.
At Mergenthaler, we make a tool for the graphic arts industry. A sophisticated tool using modern electronics to perform one of the most vital functions in printing and publishing. High-speed phototype setting.
I think there are some qualities that did get lost. I mean, there's often something very beautiful about the impression of type on good paper and so on, as was done in the past, if you look through the history. So, yeah, there may have been some losses along the way. For me, the gains outweigh the losses, is all I can say. I mean, if I put them in the balance, the gains win. But again, other people sitting here could disagree with me violently about that. And then I suppose the other very significant development since then has been the web. I mean, screen fonts and so on.
The Linotype GmbH has taken over is the responsibility for the typefaces, but not for the mechanical parts. So we have sometimes customers asking here for spare parts or whatever to the machine. We have no material and we have no solution for that.
Linotype of today, the current company, has no relationship at all with the Linotype machine.
The machine is no longer in use or whatever. And the other Linotype machines which Linotype has developed also disappear from the market. But what we see is the heritage to continue with our typefaces.
The Linotype machine had a really good contribution to type design. This is secondary in terms of the overall population, but for the type design world, this is really important because the fact that the Linotype machine became so popular in around the globe gave it enough capital to be able to invest in good typography.
Here you have one of the most amazing archives that anyone has ever known about. It is every drawing for every glyph or character or symbol that was ever made into a matrix for the Linotype machine. This is a 9-point Caslon Old-Face Italic, and here you can see the drawings for the Italic A in Caslon. They did alternate characters as well, so here's a beautiful Cap A with a swash on it.
This is an example of a drawing of the kind that was made at Linotype for many decades for metal type.
It wasn't just sort of this nuts and bolts, let's get black stuff down on white paper and that's all that was necessary. Linotype and Monotype were committed to fine typography.
As you go through here, you actually see the history of typography. Here's Century Schoolbook. Right now in front of me, I've got Cloister, I've got Garamond, Memphis. Memphis is a square serif. Here's Devanagari. That's the first font I ever worked on, by the way.
I mean, when we talk about typefaces, everybody knows the canon of the Linotype typefaces, but they never really think about where they came from or how they came to be.
Here's Primer, which was used for textbooks. Metro Light, which was very popular for newspapers for display advertising. Opticon, which was one of the newspaper typefaces. This is very interesting. Here's Bengali Bold. So again, to sell a machine or machines in India, they had to create a font for the Bengali dialect.
Even when the Linotype machine is not there, its legacy continues because it made possible for us to have these typefaces, and we still use them today.
And that's amazing to me that the designs are so strong for this machine that they've transcended the transition into a digital face.
If the 90-some machines are gone to the junk man, all my endeavors have gone down the tube after I pass away. So someday I will.
My wife is probably going to throw the machines in the hole right after me. The only way you're going to keep me down.
Hopefully they'll go on to somebody else that will take them and learn how to use them. Hopefully I'll find somebody that wants to learn the machine and I'll be able to teach them. Then the best case scenario, if that doesn't happen, is that they go to a museum where they're at least preserved as a static display of what they used to be able to do. Worst case scenario, somebody's going to come in here, look at them, and go, man, that's worth 9 cents a pound.
A scrap metal man would want money to break one up and remove it for you. But that's why those guys are usually measured by size 17 shirts, size 17 shoes, and size 17 IQ.
They weigh about 4,000 pounds, so I think scrap's going right off $280 a ton in this area, someone told me today. So, $560 total value if you took it to the scrapyard.
It is a damn shame that so much is being pushed out of the back of factories, just crashing to the ground or being broken up.
Most Linotypes got thrown out. My dad said he's probably thrown out 1,000 Linotypes in the scrap because they have no use for them.
That should give a sense of urgency to the maintenance and the salvaging of the stuff that's already out there.
There's just too many. It's like you'd like to save some, but it's too many. You have to do something with it.
It would cost me maybe $4,000 or $5,000 to get it operating again. We've offered the machine to a number of museums. Most museums already have a Linotype, but they too are just sitting there. They're not doing anything. Most of these machines now are headed for salvage yards, and I wish it were otherwise. So we have made the decision to take this to the salvage yard with a few tears. It's not what I really prefer to do. But I want to be here carefully to document the fact that that's the right decision, and it's not an easy one as we say goodbye to this today. I guess I'm glad not to have to watch it, because I know how finely machined this thing is, what a fine tool it is. And to see it just destroyed, my mind keeps going back to the inventor, Otmar Mergenthaler, and that hurts. Well, that's pretty devastating, but it also shows you the durability of the machine. It was emotionally tougher than I expected it to be. Oh, a little twinge of regret, but not really, because, hey, everything's got to make way. And even Otmar Mergenthaler's Linotype has to make way.
Over the next few decades, without Dave Seat and people like him, these machines will just stand here idly. After a while, because they're doing nothing, they will sell them for scrap metal.
Being a young operator and learning this stuff from people that are 80 years old is also feels like a bit of a responsibility, that I should learn as much as I can while I can.
If it's to survive, if it's to be appreciated, and if it's to endure, I think someone's going to have to pass it on.
The machines themselves were put up at auction in Boston. They were purchased by one of our founders and trustees, a man named Howard Gorin, who in turn asked if he could donate them to the museum. We expected to only receive one. However, when the riggers left this afternoon, there were two here.
We have two Linotype machines delivered. They still need to be connected electrically. A lot of electric wiring has to be replaced. They are going to need some mechanical attention. A lot of the drive belts have to be replaced. And from there on, we'll just see. The accomplishment is seeing them not go to China as scrap metal. I was looking for a home for the second one, and if we can find a home for the second one, I would not feel sorry about finding a good home for it, but I'll be goddamned I'm going to see this thing cut up for scrap. And that's what it boils down to.
I think for most commercial purposes, you have to say, yes, it is a dead machine. You can do it all much more quickly in other ways. On the other hand, I think it's not a dead machine in that there are enthusiasts around, and I hope there will continue to be enthusiasts who find them sufficiently interesting.
Anything that I get into that's new is going to be obsolete soon, so why not get something that's already obsolete and make the best of it?
It's a closed system. It has become what it will now always be, so that though there's a lot to learn, one lifetime isn't enough, at least the technology stands still for you.
Somebody had to say something what the future was like and who was being affected by it. So I said, I'll take the voice of the Linotype machine and I'll be the poet. This Otmar Mergenthaler chap, the Linotype he did unwrap, created quite an awful flap within the marketplace. Type foundries trembled, then they went under. Printers' jobs were rent asunder. Investors' bellies blew rotunda, and Linotype replaced the case. Books and papers multiplied in an ever-growing tide, making wings for thoughts to ride up to outer space. Now Linotype has said farewell. Right there. Computer type, it did foretell, but it let out one final yell. I've served the human race. That's it.
You want to do this one for me?
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Take 4.